Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we attempt to find the best of fun escapist books. Today we're reviewing a book, a mystery book. This is called Whose Body by Dorothy Sayers. And normally I hold it up, but I just had a digital copy, so I can't. It is old enough to be in the public domain, so it was published long enough ago that you can find a free copy. So I will do a link down below to a free copy of the book if you're interested. Okay, it is a book in a series called Lord Peter Wimsey. This is a traditional classic detective story, very similar to Agatha Christie's books, Poirot or Sherlock Holmes. It was kind of done, I think, in the same era as Agatha Christie's books. And it has that same feel to it of the classic traditional detective stories. And the Lord Peter Wimsey is our main character, and he is, I thought this book, Whose Body, was the first in his series, but it turns out it's not. And you can tell because when the author starts the book, she assumes you know some of these characters, some background about these characters, about the relationships with characters. Because Lord Peter Wimsey has a best friend, a fellow detective named actually I don't think it's Sir, I think it's Mr. Parker. And it takes a while because the author doesn't explain anything about the relationship or what Mr. Parker's doing or anything. So you have to pick it up as you go along. Turns out he is also a detective, but he's a more official, employed with Scotland Yard, as opposed to Mr. Sir Lord Wimsey, who is not. He just does it as a hobby, kind of like Sherlock Holmes. Anyway, let's start with the plot. So the plot of the story is a mystery where you start out with a body is discovered without clothing in a bathtub in a random house. So the owners of the house basically woke up in the morning, went to go use the bathroom, and lo and behold, there's a body in their bathtub. And so they call the police, and the police come, and they're like, that's weird. It doesn't seem to be related to anybody. They have no idea who this body is. And so that's what it starts out. And then, come to find out, there is a second, strangely almost connected story of another man who has gone missing. He came home, went to bed, and apparently got up without getting any clothes on and walked out the front door and was never seen again. But we have two naked men, neither of whom they're not seemingly connected. They're not the same person. And so you've got one that had no clothes on and disappeared, and one who has no clothes on and appeared from nowhere. So it's very, it seems like they should be connected in some way. And of course, it turns out there is. So the mystery is what's going on with these bodies, not bodies, because the guy who disappeared, there's, a question. Is he vanished or is he murdered? Is he being kidnapped for ransom? What's up with him? Anyway. So we've got these two mysteries, and so the mystery then is all the red herrings and suspects and clues and what ends up happening with these body mystery detective, anyway, everything that's going on with that. So I really liked it, a lot of the mystery part, okay? I really like the classic detection of it with the red herrings and all the suspects and all the twists and turns and the possible motives and, somebody comes up with a theory and maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And, what about this person over here? Could that be involved in some way? Or maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And you can find out, how it all goes, connections towards the end. So the author does a fantastic job with her mystery writing. It was really good. There are a couple other things I like outside of that. Prominently, I guess I would say, is the author is very much you can tell she is well-informed, well-read, somebody who has a broad range of classical literature at her repertoire, and she refers to it a lot. And there's actually like footnotes in this book about things that she references. Like she references Dante. And so she talks about where one of the manuscripts from Dante are. And, you know, she quotes something from a 1845 magazine or something. I mean, it's kind of interesting how much, I guess, source material she tried to incorporate in a fluffy detection book. So that was kind of fun. I did like that. I liked our historical details kind of relating to that. So this book was written 100 years ago, and so obviously you have some things that are not the way things are done today, right? Not just in like forensics and stuff, but things like processes and what you would consider the norm. And this, it doesn't, I don't think, take place in the 1920s when this was written. Maybe it did. It's kind of hard to say. Now that I think about it, it did actually reference something in 1920s, so it probably is supposed to take place in modern day of the 1920s. But they have, for example, and this could be British thing, like maybe they still do it this way. I have no idea, but it certainly is really weird to me. So they have a dead body, and apparently the process is to go before a jury in a courtroom setting to determine if this dead body warrants further investigation. Like, was this a murder? They're not looking to determine guilt for anybody. Instead, they're just looking to determine a jury and a judge need to figure out, was this enough evidence of a murder to create an investigation? And I thought, this is interesting. So they do this, and it is presided over not by a judge, but a coroner, which I thought was really weird. And then the jury seems like they're just average people, but they can ask questions directly to the witnesses, which again is very different from anything that you see on TV of modern America courtroom drama. It was just very weird. And you look at that kind of thing and go, that's a really interesting slice of history. So I liked a lot of those things like that. That was just, oh, that's interesting. I would never have realized that at some point in history it worked like that. So I liked that. Other things that I liked, so again, coming back to our author's intelligence or well-educated stance, there are some deep philosophical musings, not so much that it really takes you out of the story, but it is definitely a case of like Mr. Whimsy and Mr. Parker are discussing things like, for example, bias in writing and how that's prevalent on both sides of an issue. And it's just kind of an interesting philosophical musing that the author had the characters go through. And there are a couple things like that, including some from other characters. They just kind of go off on this philosophical tangent. It's not long enough to be like the author was preaching at you. It's just, oh, that's an interesting, side note idea to muse on as a person thinking about this philosophical idea. So I kind of like that. There is some mention of Jews in this, and shockingly for 1920 Europe, it's actually in a fairly positive sense. It's not anti-Semitic. Despite the fact that there are several Jews in this book, I was really impressed with the lack of anti-Semitism. People talk about them, and some of them, have peculiar circumstances, and it's interesting. It's also interesting to see the very weird, from an American standpoint, class system that Britain had at that time. Lord Peter Wimsey is part of a duchy family, like his mother is the Duchess and his brother is the Duke. And so he's not technically either of those, but he is a lorded person, and that gives him privileges. And it's really funny to see how people respond to those privileges. Oh, it's a lord. Well, go right on in. If you weren't a lord, you wouldn't be able to go in there or whatever. But because you're a lord, that kind of, it's weird, but it's interesting to look at from an outsider perspective. It was kind of, I'm glad that the US doesn't quite do it that way. I mean, we could have subtle power plays of, people who are wealthy and famous get more privileges than us regular peons, but not quite as blatantly as in this day and age. But that was interesting. Okay, the last thing I'll say as a positive note was the ending. So a lot of murder mysteries, you've got to have the big reveal and then the confession and, how everything ties together. And this book does have that. But what I really liked was the setup for that final confession from the killer. Because what you have too often in murder mysteries is, somebody just, they're confronted and they're like, I would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for you kids, or whatever. And you're like, in real life, nobody would do that. I mean, you're totally giving a confession by saying that. You're providing testimony against yourself. And most people in real life wouldn't come out and just blurt out all and you missed this detail, kind of thing. In this book, they do that. The killer has that confession moment, but it really fits the character and the circumstances. Like, after you come to this confession, you're like, yes, the person who has this personality in these circumstances absolutely would have done that. Totally would have blurted out this entire thing because of the ego issues going on there. And again, the circumstances, which I'm not going to relate and give it away. So, the ending of the murder mystery actually felt surprisingly real in how the circumstances fall out, which it often doesn't in these kind of books. So I really liked that. Okay, so some things that I dislike. One is, because this book is so old and it has a lot of old-fashioned character traits to it that can be a little bit frustrating. Some of which are things like, for example, I don't know whether everybody spoke French and Latin or something in the 1920s in England, but our author seems to assume that the reader knows these languages because she will write full sentences, even a full conversation in, I am assuming, French. And you sit there and go, I don't know what this says. I mean, sure, I could, Google a translator or something like that to try and figure it out. And it's not a big deal. Like, if you know nothing about what the conversation said, it was nothing related to the plot. It was just our main character sitting in a waiting room having a chat with the person next to him. But it's kind of weird that an author would do that. Again, I don't think too many authors today, for a general fiction book, would put in a whole bunch of foreign language without translating it. They just wouldn't assume that the reader knows what it is. So that's things like that, or words that are old-fashioned. Like, for example, they had a particular name for his walking cane that I have no idea what it was. I wasn't going to go look it up. It wasn't that big of a deal. But just things like that they'd use terms that are, outdated or just not in public use anymore. So it has that just because it's an older book. Another thing that I want to point out is that there are there's a random point of view in the second to the last chapter or whatever. So the author does a really weird, I consider it really weird, shifts on point of view. Normally, most of it is in third person, your standard point of view. He did this, she did that, whatever. There are some chapters that are more first person point of view, like I did this, I did that. And then there's one chapter, or one section of one chapter, where it's in the second point of view, where you open the door and you see this. And it was really confusing. It was really confusing. I still don't have any idea who the you is supposed to be in that chapter. It was weird. I don't think a modern editor would have let her get away with doing it that way. Because it's really weird to have that change in point of view to a second person point of view for a small section, and it's not even clear who the you is supposed to be. So that I didn't like. there's a stream of consciousness type of writing that this author does, and she does it throughout the whole story, not just in this one section that I'm going to relate to you around. So I'm gonna read to you to kind of give you an example of how this works. It's very passive voice, and it is one-sided in a conversation where somebody is clearly talking to the character, asking questions, and the character responds to those questions, you notice, but you never hear the question. And it's really kind of a bizarre way of doing this, but the author does this multiple times throughout the writing. So because this is on a Kindle on my phone, I'm not sure that I can give you a good page number, but I have it at about halfway through the book, location 1287 on my phone. So this is somebody in the giving testimony where the coroner and the jury are asking questions, right? And so this lady is giving responses. Yes, she was sure she'd been in the dining room. How? Because she put Mr. Thip's milk and sandwiches there ready for him, and there had been nothing in there. That she could swear to. Nor yet in her own bedroom, nor in the hall. Had she searched the bedroom cupboard in the box room? Well, no, not to say searched. She wasn't used to searching people's houses for skeletons every night. So that a man might have concealed himself in the box room or the wardrobe, she supposed he might. Now, notice what was happening there. And yes, it did do weird spelling for skeletons. I did say it weirdly on purpose. Anyway, she keeps responding to a question that apparently was asked to her, but you don't ever hear the juror or whoever it is asking the questions. And it does that a lot in this, where you just have one person's point of view of a conversation and you miss the other half of the conversation, like you're listening on a telephone conversation, but you only get the one side, you don't hear what the other person is saying. And that's what happens a lot in this, where she's relating a whole stream of information in this dialogue format, where somebody's blurting out things, but you get the impression a lot more is going on around, or with, or to, but you never get that. You just get what he's blurting out, or she. And that's just weird. It's just kind of some weird quirks about this that I didn't love. Okay, so overall, however, I did like this book a lot. I liked the mystery. It was a fairly quick read, honestly, for me. I enjoyed it. It was fun. So I'm giving it a 2 thumbs up and recommendation. I think that you should go read it if you like this sort of thing. Okay, well, thank you for watching, and I hope you join me next time.